So hey Alex, how you doing?
Amazing.
Yeah?
Really good.
Cool. What have you been up to?
Well, lots of things actually.
Yeah?
Traveling a lot.
Ah.
Been to LA to start up some interesting opportunities.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And tonight I'm going down to the Las Vegas Strip.
Let's pause the action there for a moment. You'll have noticed that up to this point, I've allowed Alex to do most of the talking because I want him to get into a conversational frame. He's got to feel like this is a natural conversation going on. So I've just done the minimal amount in terms of paying careful attention to him, listening attentively and so on, to encourage him to speak. Now, of course, in a regular conversation, this might last much longer. But there is something I need to do next, which is I have to start taking control of the situation, control the conversational, because if he gets used to doing all the talking, then he's going to be used to interrupting me constantly during the interaction. I want him to be responding to me, not the other way around. So now we've set the conversational context, I can start taking control of the conversation a little bit more and start pulling him into my reality, which is the hypnotic reality that we want. Now, I don't want to make the switch between regular conversation and a hypnotic conversation too obvious. So notice how in the next few moments, I slowly, gradually introduce certain topics, themes, and so on, and build up the hypnotic elements stage by stage. Now at this point, there's nothing magical yet in terms of what I'm saying. It's just purely joining the conversation wherever it happens to be, and introducing some of my own content. In other words, I'm beginning to build up a reason for me to add value to the conversation.
So should be
Getting
fun.
some money.
Feel lucky.
Take him to the bank, right?
Feel lucky.
Yeah.
Now let's pause the action once again here, because I'm about to introduce our main metaphor, the main vehicle, which is going to allow me to create the hypnotic condition. As I said to you right at the start of this whole clip, I love to use dreams and dream work as part of the hypnotic induction process, purely because it has so many rich associations for us in the Western world with unconscious and hypnotic-like experiences. So the first thing I want to do is introduce the vehicle before I even get into the whole induction sequence. Why? Because once the topic of dreams is open and it's live, it becomes natural to talk about another dream. But I can't go into my hypnotic dream just yet, because if I did, I run the risk of being too obvious, too overt, and alerting him. So my first, shall we say, dream sequence is just something that reflects right back on the conversation we've just had, so it becomes a smooth association, a smooth transition from what's already existed. Once the vehicle has been established as a theme, a valid topic, something that we can talk about casually, well then I can turn into something hypnotic, and of course the roller coaster begins.
You know, it's funny, because I had a dream once that I was going to like clean out the casino and just like win tons of cash. So I went out, got my $100, put on the table. I lost.
That happens.
Didn't work for me.
Now you'll notice that something very interesting just happened here. Alex actually contributed to my topic, the idea of dreaming. In other words, I tell a little joke, a humorous joke about some prophetic dream that didn't quite work out. And by commiserating, he's actually engaged in my reality, my dream storytelling and so on. And notice how he's not trying to contribute more content. This tells me that I have full control of the conversation. If he had tried to introduce some more information of his own, in other words, oh yeah, I've dreamt about this, or I'm going to go gambling there, in other words, he becomes a motor mouth who can't stop talking, then I've got my work cut out for me. I have to slow him down and take control of the conversation enough for him to actually stop talking and start listening. As it happens, everything was working according to plan. I've introduced the topic, he's looking at me, and some of the simplest signs that some trance-like condition is occurring are showing. His eyes are locked on mine more, he's looking away from the rest of the room, he's paying more attention to me, and most important of all, he's trying to contribute to the conversation without actually interrupting it. Now I'm in a good position to actually start the hypnotic procedure. Just watch what happens next.
But then I did have something very strange happen to me. This was actually a couple of weeks ago, and I had a dream.
Let's pause the action again very briefly here. We've introduced the topic, and I've done a covert test to see how likely it is that I'm going to be able to draw him into my reality. The covert test is very simple. I've thrown out a little conversational hook. I said something very strange, something very unusual happened to me. Now, that tends to pique people's curiosity. Now, what I'm looking for is for him to ask me to continue, but I'm looking especially for an unconscious cue. And we just got it. If you look back just a few seconds ago, just as I was talking about this, I had to introduce the idea of strangeness or unusualness twice. But suddenly, Alex lifts his head up and raises his eyebrows, smiles, and nods gently. This is an unconscious cue. His unconscious mind is ready and waiting. It wants to know what happens next. It's ready for something. So we've created that context in which I have focus of attention, and I've got the unconscious mind slightly stimulated already. So in terms of our ABS formula, attention, bypass critical factor, and stimulate the unconscious mind, I have the beginnings of a very, very mild trance. We can't really call it hypnotic trance yet. It's more the gateway towards it. It's the window of opportunity that lets us move forwards. I just want you to spot that, because had that not happened, I would know that my work is cut out for me and I need to do a few more things before I begin to start bringing the conversation to something more deeply hypnotic.
It was a very unusual dream. Because that's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Because aren't dreams usually unusual anyway?
I think so.
From time to time you get boring dreams, that's fair enough, but usually they're pretty trippy anyway.
Now you may have noticed that I've went around of the houses a little bit in terms of talking about how dreams are unusual anyway and sometimes they're boring and so on. What I'm doing is I want to make sure that we're still in a conversational context, so I'm not being too dramatic. If I get too dramatic, I run the risk again of warning him that something unusual is happening, maybe something hypnotic is happening. If, however, I'm just having a casual conversation about dreams and I had a really unusual dream, and then I do a little sideline along, how dreams are usually unusual anyway, two things are occurring. Number one, it's giving him a reason to be listening to a dream sequence, if you like, that was unusual, without being tipped off that I'm doing something strange to him. And number two, it's also suggesting to the unconscious mind something unusual can happen to you right now as well. Because remember, the unconscious mind only processes things in the present moment. So whatever we're presenting to it right now is part of its experience. This is something I call a parallel reality. I'm talking about one thing, but the unconscious mind is experiencing the exact same thing in a more personal sort of way at the same time. And we're going to be using that principle quite a bit more fully as we continue. Now, I want you to pay careful attention, because very shortly I'm about to do a second covert test for responsiveness to see if the unconscious mind is ready to dive into the actual hypnotic dream loop, prepare the dream machine itself. I want you to look for exactly the same signal I pointed out before, which is a smile, the lifting of the eyebrows, and a slight nod, which shows the unconscious mind is ready to follow on what we're doing. See if you can spot that so that you can actually start getting sensitive yourself to those unconscious signals.
Usually.
Only this one was one of the strangest dreams I had, but I'm really glad I had it.
There. Did you spot it? Eyebrows up, smile, and a real sense of compliance is being developed here. As soon as I get that, you may notice I actually get a little bit more directive with him. You're going to notice that my left hand, sometimes my right hand, does a lot of pointing. The pointing becomes an interesting suggestion. You see, I want him to have a certain kind of experience. In other words, the things that I am talking about as having happened to me in my dream, I want him to experience in his quote-unquote dream. In other words, inside a trance. Now, to make sure the unconscious mind gets the hint, every time I talk about myself, in terms of something that I was experiencing that I want him to experience, I'm going to point at him. It's an unconscious instruction saying, you do this. I'm talking about you now, so go ahead and do this for yourself. As you watch and listen, I want you to think about the idea of dreaming as being a code word for the unconscious to go into a trance and experience trance phenomena. So whenever I refer to the dream beginning, I'm saying, go into hypnosis. When I'm saying the dream developed this way, I'm saying have this hypnotic experience. I want you to listen out for this, because this is going to be the guiding theme throughout of this conversational induction.
You see, when the dream began, I didn't even realize I was dreaming at the time, you know, the kind of dream.
Now, I just said something very interesting that I'd like to take note of. I say something along the lines of, you know, you're having a dream and you're not even realizing that you're dreaming. Again, remember the principle is of parallel realities. Something is happening at the unconscious level that the conscious mind doesn't recognize, as a result of which we have our covert trance process. So I want him to have a covert hypnotic experience, one which at the end of which he won't even realize he's been in a trance, he just had a conversation. So we're having this split of awareness. The conscious mind thinks he's listening to a story about me going into a dream sequence. The unconscious mind is actually having the experience. And I'm making sure I point out to the unconscious mind to keep those things separate so that we are staying covert. So I'm telling the unconscious mind, have a dream where he doesn't even realize that he's dreaming. Have a trance in which he doesn't realize he's in trance. Do you see the parallel realities going on in this point? This is again something we'll be developing here, and I want him to have those experiences without popping out into the sense of, oh, I know what's going on here, because at that point the covert trance becomes an overt trance.
I'm having the dream and I don't even realize it's happening. And the first thing I'm aware of is a feeling.
The first thing that happens, or the first thing I'm aware of, is a feeling. What I'm saying here is I'm about to give you the instructions of how to go into trance. Up until this point, I've said a kind of general setup. Go into trance, don't realize you're going into trance, do it covertly, and have the same experiences that I'm about to talk about. That's been the setup. Now I'm actually doing the actual trance induction. How do we just start trance? Well, first of all, close your eyes, go into a trance. Second of all, relax and go deeper. Third of all, start traveling through your internal experiences and so on. That's what a regular overt hypnotic induction might sound like. Now, I can't do a regular overt induction unless I'm going to do something like the My Friend John technique, which at this point I didn't want to do. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give the unconscious mind instructions of how to shift his experience in a way that will let him go into a trance. The first thing, of course, is to work with the feelings. I don't have to work with the feelings. It's just that's something I happen to be choosing at that point in time. Maybe because he seems quite visual, he's visually engaged in the whole process, he's not saying very much, so I might just switch the reference points to something he would not normally be paying attention to. And as we know from the non-awareness set, when attention goes to unconscious activity, well, we tend to create more of a trance response at that point.
And it's not a pleasant feeling. Seriously, it's something that's been bugging me for some time.
Now you'll notice that in the last few moments, Alex very quickly began to adapt, kind of respond in terms of trances. So I actually moved direction from the induction sequence into the actual change work. In other words, I'm doing covert therapy here. It's so covert, not even he realizes that it's going on at the time. In order to do this, I'm going to start hijacking the trance sequence. Rather than taking the feelings down a full induction, which I didn't need to do because you'll notice the signs of trance already occurring. His eyes are locked on me. His breathing is starting to slow down. He's responding minimally. His hands aren't really moving anymore. His whole body is starting to slow down. These are all results of the trance beginning to occur. So rather than waste time inducing a full-blown trance sequence before I do my work, I'm actually going to let my work induce the trance sequence itself. Now I want you to realize something. I did not realize I was going to do this until I did. In other words, I was originally intending to do a covert trance sequence, but because he was responding so well, I decided to use the actual therapeutic element as the deepening sequence, as the inducting sequence itself. And I switched literally from the word saying it begins with a feeling, and then I noticed him respond in locking into the suggestion a little bit more, so I thought I might as well go on and take the next step, take a shortcut straight for what we were looking for, which is to activate a problem. Now, there's something which we're going to be doing here in terms of the parallel reality, this conversational induction. Remember, we talked about this is going to be a form of covert therapy. So covert that I don't know what he's going to fix, he doesn't know what he's going to fix, and more importantly, he won't even realize that he's fixing something as he's doing it. Now, in order to achieve this, I'm going to need some kind of a process to take him through. I'm going to need some kind of a power loop. Remember, a power loop is a hypnotic process that guides someone with little stepping stones along the way, saying, first experience this, then experience that, then experience this, as a result of which you'll have this experience, for example, therapeutic relief. Once you understand the concept of power loops, you can pretty much do any hypnotherapy, get any hypnotic effect without any scripts ever again. I don't like scripts because they limit people to memorization. What I like is for people to understand how scripts work. The maneuvers, the principles being implied or used within that script, so that they're free to create something fresh and new that actually fits the situation every single time. In this particular sequence, the Dream Machine, I'm going to use something that those of you who have studied with me already will be very familiar with, the PCAT formula. It's in the Conversational Hypnosis Home Study course. It's also, of course, in the Conversational Hypnotherapy DVD set. The PCAT formula is one of the most elegant, simplified ways of doing hypnotherapy for almost anything. And it stands for four very simple maneuvers. You start with a problem. You need to plug the person into the problem so that they experience it at some level. Their neurology is activated. Now that the problem is alive, you have something worth fixing. It's like taking the car into the garage. If the car's not in the garage, well, there's nothing to fix. So the P stage of the PCAT formula activates something worth fixing inside the other person. The C stage of the PCAT formula stands for the critical factor bypass. Usually that would be the trance sequence. In other words, you induce trance. Now, because we're doing this all within the trance, the C becomes something slightly different. The C becomes clear the mind. You see, once you've activated the problem, you can't keep stimulating the problem. You've got to clear the slate a little bit to create some room in which to work to create a solution. Think of it as having a table filled full of like dirty silverware. Before you can begin, you have to clean a little space up where you put all your polishing rags and polishing cloths and so on. Once you have that little space, then you can pick up your first little silver spoon and rub it and polish it and put it down in a clean spot. Now, of course, the more you're working, the more you can take the dirty spoons, dirty cutlery, clean it up, and you're creating your own space for the clean cutlery to go as you go along. So the PCAT formula works the same way. You'll start with a problem, then you're creating a clear space inside the mind in which the solution can actually start to emerge. Later on, we apply the solution to the actual problem, which is of course the T, the final part of the PCAT formula. So P stands for the problem, C stands for clear the mind, create a place in which the solution can come. A stands for access resources. That's the solution that we're going to be applying to the problem. And finally, T stands for transform and usually test as well. This is the stage at which we'll take what we've done and we'll add it onto the problem so the problem just dissolves. It can't stay the same way anymore. It's kind of like thinking of having an oil slick on water and adding the soap. The soap is the resource, the solution. But it's not until the soap touches the oil and the water that the oil slick disappears. It actually has to mix with the water before it can do its work. And the same thing is true of the resource. The resources have to mix with the problem in order to be able to do their work. So look out for those maneuvers. I'll stop the recording as we go along to point points out for that. But the very first thing we're doing right now is the P part of the PCAT formula, the problem stage. Now I want to point something else out to you here. When we go through the problem stage, and I indirectly using the principle of parallel realities, when I start stimulating the problem inside of Alex, I'm going to be repeating this idea of having a problem over and over and over again. Why am I doing this? Well, I want his mind to get the fact that he's supposed to come up with a problem of his own. I don't want to mention it casually and move on. I want something to actually pop in mind. And how I do that is to use the priming principle by talking about something long enough that he spontaneously begins to think of something himself. Now, of course, if he spontaneously starts thinking of a problem, that's something that the unconscious mind has selected for him, which is perfect. In a different situation where we already start with a problem, well, my work is a lot easier at that point because I don't have to spend so much time on the problem sequence. We're already there, so to speak. So do go ahead and just watch that little piece there and notice the reaction that Alex is having and how I go around the idea of a problem over and over and over again, and notice the point at which I stop, at which I move on to something else. That'll be the point at which you can see him really starting to switch his mind. He becomes more contemplative, like his mind's looking for something, is finding something. You can almost see his face melting down a little bit. It's not like he's in a huge amount of sorrow or something, but you can see that his positive vibe from a moment ago has suddenly dulled down a little bit. Look out for that, because that's what tells me I'm ready to move on to the next stage in the sequence. I'm not going to keep going until I have him full-blown abreacting in some crazy unpleasant experience. No. It's enough for me to see his whole physiology shift, his expression become a little bit more somber, his energy levels to die down a little bit, his eyes to glaze over a little bit more. These things all tell me that he's engaging with the problem at the unconscious level enough so that we can have something worth solving. So go ahead and watch that now.
And it really was not a pleasant feeling. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't a pleasant thing. I didn't know what it was. It was obviously important, but I couldn't tell what it was. And all around me was a kind of darkness.
And all around me was a kind of darkness. Why did I say that? Up until this point, I've been stimulating the problem, and you'll notice how I'm pointing at Alex in order to make sure that he gets the idea that he's supposed to have the problem, he's supposed to search something out for himself, and I'm running through that a few times. Then I come on to this idea of the darkness. This actually is a multi-level communication. I'm doing several things at the same time. The first thing I'm doing is I'm actually beginning to acknowledge the elements of a hypnotic reality. His gaze is fixed on myself. The audience and the other people in the room are disappearing from him. In other words, he's developing a kind of tunnel vision or a hypnotic fixation with me. In order to acknowledge his experience, at the same time as encouraging more of that hypnotic fixation to occur, I'm using the metaphor of darkness as a way of telling his unconscious mind, let the rest of the world recede into darkness. It's unimportant. The only thing in front of you right now, in other words, the hypnotic interaction, that's the only thing that needs to be your focus of attention, that needs to grab your attention at this point. The second reason for using the idea of darkness at this point is because, of course, darkness in the Western world has a lot of associations with problems, pains, and so on. Fear, concern, that sort of stuff. I'm stuck in a dark place. So I'm continuing this metaphor of problems so that at the same time it's creating this hypnotic context where the outside reality recedes into darkness and becomes ignored. In other words, a negative hallucination. At the same time as that's happening, the positive reality, which is the problem reality we're activating, becomes more real in the form of a metaphoric journey through darkness.